بسم الله لمنا الأقدس اللهم صل على البيان ومن آمن به في كل شان بالعزة والجلال وأذب اللهم من لم يؤمن به بالسطوة والإدال. Well, am I stirring the pot with some of these Baha'i cultists on this academic Sheikhi, Bobby, and Baha'i list? You know, a gate-kept Baha'i private list where the predominant discourse is the leading fundamentalist discourse of the Hyphen Baha'i organization. I won't, you know, they're probably going to delete me out of with the account that I'm using currently. I don't care. I've got several more accounts that have been lurking there for years, and I can monitor that place until the cows come home, or unless they deleted everybody from the list. Anywho, the purpose of this particular podcast is I am going to address one of the gaping contradictions of Baha'i theology vis-a-vis the question of progressive revelation. Now, I'm going to begin here. So first of all, I'm going to call this particular podcast Cyclical Time and the Confused 500,000-Year Illimitability Claim of Baha'u'lláh. And I'm going to criticize this contradiction of an idea that exists in the utterances of Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri. But I want to start here. I want to start with a very famous hadith attributed to the fifth Imām Muḥammad al-Bāqir alayhi salam, where he confirms or he talks about the perpetuity of creations. Now, what we're going to mainly, the main part of this podcast is going to be discussing the issue of Kor wa Dor, or epicycles or aeons, and dispensations or eras. But let me first read you this hadith. In this hadith, the fifth Imam, confirms the perpetuity of creations, destructions, and recreations of the world. He says in this hadith, I quote, "Dost thou believe that this is the only world God created, that it did not create creatures other than thee? Indeed, God had created thousands upon thousands of worlds, with thousands upon thousands of atoms, and ye dwell upon only the last of these worlds, in the midst of the last of these Adamic creations." Let me read this again, which is such a beautiful hadith. "Dost thou believe that this is the only world God created, that it did not create creatures other than thee? Indeed, God had created thousands upon thousands of worlds, with thousands upon thousands of atoms, and ye dwell upon only the last of these worlds, in the midst of the last of these Adamic creations." Unquote. This hadith is quoted in al-Ṣadūq, the Sheikh al-Ṣadūq, in his kitāb al-tawḥīd. It can be found on page 277 in Sayyid Hajir Moghaddam Ṭihrānī's edition of the kitāb al-tawḥīd. This is my translation of this hadith. The edition, Ṭihrānī's edition, doesn't have a place or a date, but it was published originally in Qom. Now, in one of the issues that actually piqued my interest about the flaw of Baha'i theology, way back in the 1990s on the original Talisman and Indiana EDU list, was this thing that it was discussed back and forth at the time, and some of these American and Western Baha'is were actually denying that this thing was actually uttered by the Baha'i founder, but actually it is. And it occurs, it's actually published in the eighth volume of the Ma'idiyya al-Samani. This is the text by Ishrakh-Khavari, and Mr. Hajir Moghaddam Aziz Mboya did partial translations of the key parts of this thing. I couldn't be bothered to sit down and translate the entirety of this small tablet by Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri, so I'm going to read you the translation by Mr. Moghaddam and Mr. Mboya. Quote, "In this, Baha'u'lláh begins by saying, Erelong, you will hear the call of the clamorous impostor. Don't pay attention unto him, but leave him to himself." Then Mr. Moghaddam comments, Baha'u'lláh says the sun will soon come claiming to be a manifestation, but that his manifestation only appears once in 500,000 years, unquote. Then Mr. Mboya continues the translation, which is actually not a bad translation. I'll give him that. He says, quote, say, if in each day another manifestation is manifested, the cause of God will not find rest in the cities and the lands. This is the revelation or manifestation that manifests itself or his own self only once every 500,000 years time. So the manifestation that only occurs once every 500,000 years. Thus had we unveiled the cover and we lifted the veil. Blessed is the man that recognized the purpose of God. In his recognition, he has rejoiced in his heart and been made firm in the cause, such that he be made to stumble even by the entire creation. Unquote. Yada, yada, yada. This is a mess, a theological mess that is introduced by Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri that very patently contradicts any notion of progressive revelation as conceived in the Bayan. Now, I will get to the pre-Bayanic context of some of these ideas, but let me first of all say the following, right? According to the Bayanic teachings, right, every manifestation that occurs is superior to the one before it. That the purpose of the All-High in its self-revelation to humanity is the constant self-perfection of the message, as it were, right? So this argument that Baha'u'llah is putting in front of us, it actually contradicts the very notion of progressive revelation. And it is a fallacy vis-a-vis the argument of progressive revelation as posited by the primal point. Now, implicitly, the argument that the Bayan puts forth about progressive revelation and the cycles of time is the following. The cycles of time. Now, this in itself is these two concepts are very central to understanding a litany of other issues about the theology of the primal point, and also some of the esoteric or botany theologies and metaphysics and theophanologies as well. And it runs as follows. We have the notion of the kaur, or the epicycle or aeon, and the notion of the dor, the dispensation or era. This concept has in Islam at least, it has a Ismaili genesis. Let me quote from page 277 of Farhad Daftari's The Ismailis, Their History and Doctrines, where discussing the Tayyibi, the Tayyibi Ismailis, these are the remnants of the Fatimids, where he's actually expositing their notion of cyclical time. Let me start here. He says, quote, an unknown number of successive cycles of kashf and satr, of unveiling and veiling, each one composed of 7 periods or eras, occurred until the present cycle of satr, or veiling, which was initiated by the historical Adam of the Quran, the first natiq or speaker of the present age. When this cycle is closed by the 7th natiq or speaker and the expected qa'im or riser of the current cycle, there will again begin another cycle of manifestation inaugurated by an Adamic juz'i, a partial atom, and so on. The countless alternation of these cycles will continue until the parousia of the final qa'im, the final ariser, proclaiming the final qiyamah, the resurrection of resurrection, the qiyamat al-qiyamat, at the end of the grand cycle. According to some Tayyibi calculations, the duration of the grand cycle, al-Qawr al-Azam, is estimated at 360,000 times, 360,000 years, amounting to almost 130 billion years. The consummation of the grand cycle will also mark the end of the Tayyibi Ismaili mytho-history. Unquote. I'll leave it there, quoting it from Farhad Daftari. This can be found between pages 272 and 273 of the Ismailis, Their History and Doctrines, the 2nd edition. Now, let's move along. There's even a better explanation of this idea of the Qawr and Dor by Yaron Friedman in his very, very interesting, very well-written book, The Nusayri Alawis. Right? This is the book, I think, that anybody who wants to understand the philosophy and the religious doctrines of the Nusayri sect of Shia who are the ruling class in Syria at the moment, the Alawites, needs to really look at this book. But let me start here. This occurs on page 110 of Yaron Friedman's book, and it is section 5 of the chapter. Cyclical history is the subtitle of the chapter. To quote, I'm going to read this whole page. He says, the Nusayri concept of history is cyclic. History repeats itself in historical cycles of time in different variations. In each cycle, 7 messengers or prophets of God, called awadem, the plural of Adam in Arabic, appear each time to another society. History is formed of large cycles that contain small cycles of time. They are called akwar, singular of kor, eon, and adwar, singular of dor or era. The calculation of this time and the definition of these terms differ from one Nusayri source to another. The term dor appears in the doctrine of Abdullah ibn Muawiyah. According to Nobakti, this last Qali or esoteric extremist who also believed in transmigration in the doctrines of the shades, the Adila, transmitted these doctrines to Jabir ibn Abdullah and to Jabir ibn Yazid al-Jufi. The term Kor is also used in the similar Ismaili doctrine of the cycles of time. In Ibn Nusayr's writings, traditions are found concerning the cycles of time in the world of light, followed by other cycles in human history in the material world. In his kitāb al-Akwar wal-Adwar, the book of the eons and the dispensations, based on the tradition of Jabir ibn Abdullah, there's another period of time which preceded human history and contained 10 cycles called Akwar, each of 100,000 years, marking a separation between each event in the world of light. After these millions of years, human history began. In his Mithal wa Surah, similitudes and form, Ibn Nusayr cites a tradition transmitted by the mystic Ali ibn Ahmad al-Aqiqi, in which Imam Jafar alayhi salam says that history contains 7 akwar, or eons, each consisting of 7,000 years, or according to another tradition, every kor contains 400 adwar, and every dor consists of 50,000 years. So every dispensation, there are 400 dispensations in every kor, and every dor, every dispensation consists of 50,000 years. Later Nusayri writers give different proposals as to the length of the cycles. Hassan ibn Shu'aba mentions 2 different traditions. The first based on Mufaddal's transmission from Imam Jafar alayhi salam, using other terms for time. According to his tradition, the time that preceded human history includes 12,000 qibab, each of 12,000 abwab, or singular of gate, or plural of the singular gate. Each bab consists of 12,000 years. According to another tradition transmitted from Ali ibn Ahmad al-Aqiqi, human history contains 400,000 akwar, or eons, each of 400,000 years. Wow, very close to the 500,000 number. In each kor or aeon, the 7 awadim, the 7 Adams appeared. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and his family, Ali, Fatima, and the Imams, alayhim afsal salat wa salam. Another tradition transmitted by al-Khasibi and also attributed to the Imam Jafar alayhi salam maintains that history contains 50,000 adwar, or dispensation. Each door contains 50,000 akwar, each consisting of 400,000 years. Unquote. Wow, isn't this also close to the 500,000 year of Baha'u'lláh? Now, this idea also exists in a form within the Kabbalah. So, on page 462 of Gershom Scholem's The Origins of the Kabbalah, we have the following. Quote, he says, through the intermediary of Indian and Arabic sources, that rather than under the influence of Platonic thoughts, ideas of this type slipped into astrological writings in particular. Abraham Bar Hiyya in Aragon was familiar with them around 1125 Common Era as the quote-unquote teachings of certain philosophers. For it informs us that some of them say, quote, after all, the creatures have passed from potentiality to actuality. God once again returns them to potentiality as in the beginning and then brings them back to actuality a second and a third time, and thus without end. Others again say that the days of the world are 49,000 years and that each of the 7 planets reigns 7,000 years in the world. When at the end of 49,000 years they have completed their reign, God destroys his world, leaves it for 1,000 years in a state of tohu or chaos, and at the end of the 50th millennium he renews it as it was in the beginning, unquote. So, this is some of the background and context to this idea of the adwar and or akwar and the adwar. Now, the Bayanic concept of the akwar and adwar is actually implied. The Bab uses both of these terms, especially in the Persian Bayan, but also through many of his other writings. We find it also in the Book of the Five Grades, in the late works, and also in the kitāb Asma'i Kulli Shay, the book of the names of all things. But although the years, there's no specific time or it is not delineated as to the duration of time, the basic idea is the following, that there is the epicycle, or the eon, the code, right? The large container of time. Then there are the adwar, the periodizations or the dispensations that mark the eras of each of the talk, the prophet speakers, the lawgivers, right? So from Adam to Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is a code in the conception of the primal point. So in the conception of the primal point, the code, the past code, began with Adam and ended with Muhammad. So this is the Bayani explanation of the seal of prophecy, that Muhammad is indeed the seal of the prophets and even the seal of the messengers for the particular eon or code in which history was culminating towards, right? And this keeps basically the integrity of the argument of the Quran and Hadith intact for Muhammad being the last of the prophets, right? What happens with the dispensation of the Bayan is that not only does the primal point inaugurate a new dispensation or dor, he also inaugurates a greater epicycle or eon, a new code, right? These are things that obviously went right over the head of Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri. Or if he understood them, he deliberately wasn't going to exposit on them because it makes him not look so big overall. It makes actually the Bab look as the Adam of the present code and not Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri. However, be that as it may, even since we have passed into a new code, a new eon, as it were, with the revelation of the Bayan, right? Each manifestation that occurs is by definition superior to the last. So the manifestation of he whom God shall make manifest is superior to that of the primal point, as he says, although it is the same manifestation, it is the manifestation of the exact same primal will, the Mashiach al-Ullah that has existed and traversed all of the periodizations of history and time. But then in the Kitab Panshahan, there are several places where the primal point also then very explicitly states that there will be a he whom God shall make manifest, after a he whom God shall make manifest, and after a he whom God shall make, and so on and so on and so forth, with each of these manifestations being superior to the last. This is the Bayani concept of progressive revelation. And the Bab uses the concept of age. He talks about a 12-year-old prepubescent, as one manifestation, and once they turn 14, another manifestation, and once they turn 16, being another manifestation, and so on and so forth. The same primal will. But nevertheless, each manifestation is superior to the last. And this is the crux of the argument of the Bayan. When Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri comes in the middle of this and throws this whole 500,000 year illimitability argument, that there will be no one like him to appear in 500,000 years and that all will come under his shadow, he is actually throwing a monkey wrench in the entire idea of progressive revelation. And this idea of his is far more problematic than either an exoteric understanding of the seal of prophets in Islam, or even the unique incarnation of Christ in Christianity. This argument basically is a theological straitjacket that is making any sort of theoretical manifestation or self-revelation of the Al-High impossible. And hence, this is one of the poison pills in Baha'i theology, and one of the gaping contradictions of Baha'i theology vis-a-vis the Bayan, and why, what Mirza Hussain Ali says, it shows that, in fact, he was quite hostile to this notion that the Bab introduced in his writings about progressive revelation and what the meaning of that is. So Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri believes that there has been no prophet messenger, there has been no manifestation for the last 500,000 years like him, and nor will there be another prophet manifestation of his rank in the next 500,000 years. That everyone that will come in the next 500,000 years, if humanity even survives for that long, will be inferior in rank to him until the time of this 500,000 year manifestation. This is such bullshit and such incredible arrogance and presumption by this individual, this false claimant of Baha'ism, a founder of Baha'ism, that this overshadows every conceivable problem that has occurred in the Abrahamic traditions about the seal of prophets and the unique incarnation and so on and forth. This is exclusivism on steroids. This makes Islam and Christianity look completely tame by comparison. But this is not the doctrine of the Bayan. The Bab the primal point is very explicit that the revelation, self-revelation of God after him, the Zuhur Allah after him, will be superior to him, to his own at his time, and the one that follows that one will be superior to that one, and on and on and on and on and go. We go. But not so with Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri. And this is why, this particular point of theology makes Baha'ism perhaps one of the most pernicious theological doctrines ever. Now, of course, they conceal such doctrines that have a place and are actually points of Baha'i theology from a lot of these Westerners and non-Iranian Baha'is. Because, when you throw something like that this is actually what Baha'u'llah believed, about himself, a lot of these people will walk away, especially those who have come from a Muslim background or even fundamentalist Roman Catholic and Protestant backgrounds. People who are looking for a more open-ended kind of theology look at this, and once they digest, the implications of what Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri is trying to say, will run completely the other way. And this is why these sorts of ideas, expounded by the founder of Baha'ism, are never ever placed in the hands of non-Iranians. Like I said, this is published. The snippet of this tablet is actually published in the 8th volume of Ishraq-Khavari's Ma'de Asmani. It has a provisional translation partially by Mr. Hajir Moghaddam and Aziz Mboya. Hajir Moghaddam is a very nice individual, a very sweet man. Aziz Mboya, unfortunately, is a bit of a hothead and a takfiri Baha'i. Now, Abbas Effendi also supports this idea by his father about this 500,000 year interval, and illimitability of 500,000 years, the likes of which will be never seen. So this particular doctrine of Baha'ism actually has a grounding, a firm grounding in both its founder and his successor. I don't know what to say, but this is, like I said, one of the most pernicious doctrines ever presented, ever made into theological doctrine ever. It makes the Islamic doctrine of the finality of Islam, as well as the Christian unique incarnation, look like nothing by comparison. But the primal point didn't say anything like that. In fact, the doctrine of progressive revelation in the Bayan means exactly what it says, that from each manifestation and the next, each manifestation is superior than the last. And on it goes. And this is about the incessant perfectibility of creation. Now, those who will look at this will hear a resonance from Mullah Sadra's doctrine of transubstantial motion, harakat al-Jawhariyah, within what the Bab is saying. That is definitely present in what the Bab is saying. And that doesn't mean to say the Bab actually sat and studied the ideas of Mullah Sadra. But this is this is the juxtaposition, this is the comparison that could be made. That the Bayani idea of progressive revelation has a resonance to this idea of Mullah Sadra's transubstantial motion. And it is a very consistent and straightforward doctrine. It also explains what the finality of Islam actually means from this Batini perspective. And I'll say it again, in the doctrine of the Bayan, Adam was the inaugurator of a code, an epicycle, and Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, was the seal and the final messenger prophet of that code, right? The primal point, the point of the Bayan, Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, the Bab, was the inaugurator of a new code or aeon, as well as a new dor. And that is what the doctrine of the Bayan about the code and the dor is. Nothing further is found in the Bayani writings about this issue other than several glosses that Subha Azal makes here and there throughout his own writings, and not to mention, most importantly of all, the calendar, the supplementary calendar of Subha Azal, which is named the calendar of the Kor Wador, which I translated and put on Academia EDU. I will link to all of this material in the description box of this video, and I will leave it there for now. La hujja ila aliyan qabla nabil.